Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. I'm sitting here with Riki Mafune, and we've been having a conversation about what we're not going to talk about and what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to tell you how I know Riki. So I probably saw Riki in 1980.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
With a band called the Dinette Set. Yeah. I can't remember where I saw the Dinette Set at, but in Seattle. And then the next time I saw Riki Mafune was probably in 2022 at Christy McWilson's house. And I was interviewing Christy, and then I was blindsided that there was going to be a live music performance. and Riki and Christy performed a version of the Heat's "I Don't Like Your Face" for me, which was really a lot of fun. And I've seen you a couple of times since then at other Christy McWilson events.
We did the Slow Loris tour.
Right.
And yeah.
And during, I think we were down in Tacoma, you and I started talking.
Right.
And I don't know how we got onto the topic, but we got onto the topic about the treatment of the Japanese during pre and post World War II.
Right.
And I thought it would be an interesting topic to have us chat about today. So Riki Mafune is my guest. Riki, why don't you fill my listeners in a little bit on your backstory? What have you been doing for the last 40 years? No, just kidding. What does the audience need to know about you?
Oh, well, I'm a third generation Seattleite. My father and my paternal grandmother were both born here on the Japanese side. On the paternal side of my dad's family, my great grandmother was born in Japan. My grandfather was born in Japan. Okay. So I am kind of in between Nisei, Issei, and Sansei as far as like what generation I am. Okay. So Issei were the first that came over and may or may not have some kind of citizenship here. Nisei were the first that were born here. Issei were the generation after that. So because of this interesting difference of who was born here and how long they'd been here and who wasn't born here, I'm kind of in between those.
Okay.
It depends
approximately when did your grandparents come over?
On my father's maternal side, they came over around the turn of the century.
And do you know why they came over?
They came over for work.
Okay. And what were they doing?
Fishing and working on the railroad.
Okay.
So there was actually more Japanese coming over. I think people tend to traditionally think of a lot of Chinese coming over for that kind of work, which they did, and a lot of Filipinos as well.
Yes.
But there was, at one point, there were more Japanese coming over than any other Asian group on the Pacific Rim.
Okay.
Then on my dad's paternal side, they came over first in 1925 and left, went back to Japan, and then came back here a couple years later with my grandfather in tow, who was just a little baby.
All right. So you grew up in the Seattle area.
I did. I grew up in the University District.
Your dad, I'm trying to set the whole table.
Sure.
Here. So where did your dad grow up? Where's his childhood at?
Well, my dad, after the internment camps, they originally were living in South Seattle before the war, before Pearl Harbor, near Japantown, mm-hmm. which is kind of no more. Although there are some great walking tours you can do through Wing Luke and Seattle Public Library. You can get maps and do that. But when they were interned, my dad's father decided to stay in Idaho, and they ended up in a small mountain town. So my dad spent his formative years in a one-room schoolhouse, teeny little town. Right after the war, they weren't allowed into the town after sundown. No Indians, no Japanese. I'll say it nicely. There's other things they called them. And But then my grandfather opened, it was Cascade, Idaho. It was Boise Cascade logging town. So he opened a diner. My dad grew up slinging hash, having the school principal come over, grab him by the ear, reading my grandfather the riot act, and dragging my dad off to school.
Okay. So when did your dad move to Washington?
He moved here when he was 18, because also after the camps, my great-grandmother and my two great-aunts, they had lost their floral business and their greenhouse that they had started in Edmonds. One of the first greenhouses in the area was in Edmonds, and it was theirs. And they went back to the University District and reopened their flower shop. They were lucky to get it back. And so my dad was able to come here, stay with them, and start school at the UW.
See, to me, the story would have been more entertaining if you would have said at 18 he was tired of slinging hash, so he came to Seattle. But, well, okay, we can inject that as humor. Okay.
Well, he was tired of slinging hash, and he was also tired of, I think, Cascade, although I think he had romantic ideas of it later on in his life.
Okay, so he went to the UW, and then I know you went to the UW.
I went to Seattle U. There's a little bit of story behind that, too.
Oh.
I
thought you went, why do I think you went to the UW?
Because I worked at the UW.
That might be why.
Yeah,
okay.
That's why.
Okay,
yeah, I
knew that.
I worked in public health research. Yeah, okay. Sure you did.
I'm rolling my eyes, folks. Okay, so you touched on a couple things that we talked about briefly in Tacoma, and I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit more. You mentioned the greenhouse and the flower shop.
Right.
And you just stated that they were lucky to get it back.
Yes.
What about that process, if anything, do you know?
Okay, let me preface this with the concept of generational trauma. Some families, after they got out of the internment camps, just wanted to assimilate. My family was one of them. My great-grandmother, who spoke very broken English, made an edict that said, it didn't include her, but she made an edict that said, we don't speak Japanese anymore. And so it was, I think, very important for them to just try and go back as if everything was normal, as if nothing had happened. Lots of other families and lots of other generations deal with it very differently. Like, I'm much more interested in the research and activism about it. Not so my family, they didn't really want to even talk about it. I think there was a lot of shame. This is nothing new. People have talked about this before. But my great-grandfather, who started the greenhouse in Edmonds, died on the way to the camps. And he was told that he couldn't be moved. There were doctors, white doctors, who wrote on his behalf to the government. They said, screw that. He died on the way. He ended up at Camp Harmony, which is the Puyallup Fairgrounds. But that's what they called it then. They called it Camp Harmony. They gathered together thousands and thousands of Japanese Americans from the surrounding area, kept them there, eventually built some barracks. You know, some people were in horse stalls. My grandfather died there. And so there was this incredible trauma that the family was dealing with. And I think so when they got back, they just wanted to not be invisible, but under the radar. So when they got the shop back, the greenhouse was no more. When they got the flower shop back, it was because the people that had taken it over for them had pretty much run it into the ground. And they only had 7 to 10 days to get ready to go after 9066 was signed. But the women in my family were smart business people. And so they got it back. They worked their asses off. They built it back up and owned it for 7 years.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions because you threw a couple things in there that
sure.
I'm going to guess most of us listening don't know.
Okay.
9066 is what? And the Camp Harmony at the Puyallup Fairgrounds, approximately to your knowledge, how many people and what years was this?
There was close to 3,000 people in Camp Harmony.
Okay.
That was Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt. So the bombing of Pearl Harbor was in December 7th of 41. The executive order was signed in February of 1942.
Okay.
And that's a day of remembrance for Japanese Americans now. And, but they were given 5, 7, 10 days, and only what they could carry is a common phrase for people who know about the internment. And so people had to hustle. They had to either sell everything at pennies on the dollar. They had to try to get people that would possibly keep an eye on their property. Those were the lucky ones. Mm-hmm. And they just had to walk away from everything they had. And, you know, I mean, it's human nature too. I mean, people knew that these people were desperate to sell or liquidate anything they possibly could.
Right.
And so a lot of them just got completely screwed, if they got anything at all.
So basically then Camp Harmony started being populated, say, March of 42.
Right. So this was the area that is now, we consider it, well, it is Puyallup Fairgrounds and the parking lots surrounding it.
Okay.
And the euphemism Camp Harmony was actually what the government called it. So they gathered, they put everybody in buses or on the train and took them down there, and they had to wait down there for months until the barracks were completed. And most of the people from Camp Harmony went to Minidoka, which was in Northern California, and Tule Lake. What happened with my family is that my great-grandmother was considered an illegal alien, or an alien, not an illegal alien. She was here legally, but she was not a citizen. She was not a naturalized citizen. So even though my great-grandfather had just died and she was the matriarch of the family and was not young, but wasn't really old either, but she was considered like public enemy. And so they split the family up and sent her to Tule Lake, which was the highest security camp.
And where's Tule Lake?
Tule Lake's in, wait a minute, I had that reversed. So Tule Lake is in Northern California.
Okay.
And Minidoka is in Idaho.
Okay.
I believe.
So they split the family up.
So they split the family up, and they worked to get the family back together. But what the deal was is that Minidoka was a lower security camp. And so the family had to go to her.
Okay.
So they had to go to Tule Lake.
Okay. So your family then left Camp Harmony and went.
Well, they went from Camp Harmony, which is a holding camp.
Right.
My grandfather, my father, and they went to Minidoka, and my grandmother went to Tule Lake all alone. And they were like, oh, hell no. And so I don't know how they did, honestly. I mean, when I said that my family was one of those families that didn't really want to talk about it, it's true. So I had to kind of pull these little bits of information out of them and kind of grapevine-y and kind of and then confirm it later in my life, talk to some of them that were willing to talk a little bit more and say, okay, I heard this when I was a kid. Is this true? So all of that was confirmed, that my grandmother was sent there alone after losing my great-grandfather, and they've managed to get the family reunited, but they had to be in the highest martial law situation. And
when were they released? What year?
They were released at different times. My great aunts, who were juniors and seniors in high school at the time, were in the camps for a little over a year, and then they were allowed to apply for work release. And my father, who was 5, 6, 7 at the time, they stayed longer and ended up getting work release as well. I mean, one of the things about the internment was a lot of these people were farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, or, doing some kind of like commerce like that. And so they gather up all these people that do these jobs, and suddenly there's nobody to do these jobs. And so, the government decides, well, let's first like get as many of them in the military as we can. And then let's like create work release so that these people can go out and do work for practically nothing. So they left and were picking potatoes in Idaho after a couple years.
Everything was for the war effort. I mean,
right.
All hands on deck for the war
Absolutely.
effort, even if we don't think your hands.
Right. Even if you're, my dad was born in Seattle, so was my grandmother.
Right.
But, let's go have them pick potatoes.
So after the internment camps and after that phase for the family, and then your dad ended up in Idaho.
Right.
Was slinging hash, is what you said.
Right. Raising a wild pony and.
Okay. So,
cut his thumb off.
Oh.
Anyway.
All right.
At night, chopping wood, that kind of thing. Just the typical small town stuff.
So he went to the University of Washington.
He did.
And what did he study at the U?
He studied sociology.
Okay.
And my mother met. She was going to Seattleite. She was an art student.
Okay.
And as things happen sometimes, they were planning on getting married, but they had to get married a little sooner.
Got it. Okay.
And so my mom and dad both dropped out of college.
Okay.
Because my dad needed to work to support the kid that was coming, my older brother.
All right.
And the family was not happy about this union, neither side.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't done back then. I think my parents were very brave.
So your father's Japanese.
Right.
And your mother?
Is Irish and Norwegian.
Okay.
Yeah. So my whole life I've had people go, oh, your mom, it's so nice to have a Japanese mom. And I'm like, no, my dad's Japanese.
We talked about this before we hit
right.
record. That is kind of the stereotype, though.
It is. It's a total stereotype. And it's a little on the racist side, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yes. But the reason, and I'll explain why I think of it as being accurate, is I grew up in Tacoma, right by, JBLM, Fort Lewis McChord Air Force Base. So you would see a lot of military men retire in the Lakewood, Tacoma area.
Right.
And a lot of them would have wives from
Okinawa or
wherever they served,
right,
Germany,
right.
The Philippines,
exactly.
Okinawa, Japan, Korea.
Yeah.
And so you would see a lot of military men
right.
with Asian or European wives.
Right.
That's why that's my filter.
Sure.
But I lived in a military community.
Yeah.
So,
and I can see why you could see that.
Now,
see it that
I'd been
way.
here in Seattle as a young kid, I might have seen it differently.
Right.
So your mom and your dad met,
mm-hmm.
dropped out of school,
mm-hmm.
had a kid,
mm-hmm.
your older brother.
Mm-hmm.
What did they do for employment?
My mother got a job as a secretary at the YMCA on 50th and Brooklyn.
Okay.
My dad worked for my Norwegian grandfather who had a wooden halibut fishing boat moored at Fisherman's Terminal. They built it here. They came from Edmonton. I can't say it.
Edmonton?
Wyoming.
Oh.
And they were fisher people. They were fisher people in Norway.
Right.
Built a beautiful wooden fishing boat that is actually still in service. Her name is the Vancy, and sometimes she's moored down at the Museum of History and Industry. And so when my dad was very young, he would go out and go fishing with my mom's dad.
Okay.
He took over the fishing business from his dad.
Okay. And so your parents just made ends meet. Did they ever go back? Were they ever able to go back and finish their formal?
No.
Okay, so they never
did.
Right.
No.
All right.
And we scraped by.
Right.
We scraped by. But my parents owned a fourplex, so they had income coming in from college students.
Okay.
A rent, and so they made it work.
So then
we didn't know we were broke.
Right. Well,
that's that's the kind of parents we were. I mean, I look back and I go, wow, we really didn't have much. But growing up, I didn't feel that way.
Right. All right. So then at some point later, you're born. And
2 years later.
2 years later. Okay, so your parents are married.
Right.
2 years later.
Right.
And you grew up in the Roosevelt View District area.
Totally smack dab in the district.
Right. All right. As a kid, because I'm sitting here across from you,
right,
you have Asian features.
Right.
But I wouldn't say you look Japanese.
Ambiguous is my daughters and I talk about that a lot.
Okay.
There's an ambiguity sometimes.
Yeah, just a little, like,
yeah.
Okay. So, but as a kid, kids can be pretty blunt, cruel. Did you fit in when you went to school?
Well, that's an interesting question because part of it may not have anything to do with my ethnicity. But I was kind of I was a tomboy. Mm-hmm. I was loud.
Okay.
I was also, I looked different. And my parents were very into the civil rights movement and into voluntary busing before it became mandatory. So I was bused from first grade to the central area. Okay. Which I'm glad for the experience now. But it was hard back then because I wasn't black, I wasn't white.
Right.
So I didn't feel like I fit in. I got called chink and ching chong and Jap and, and I got my whole childhood, what are you, was a question that came up a lot.
Right. And I kind of guessed that, right? Yeah. Just because I'm remembering my childhood and people that didn't look like the majority of the of the room we were in. Sure. Okay. So you already said your family didn't talk much about this period of the internment and all of that, right? So as a kid, when did you become aware of this and maybe curious about it?
It was my mother, my Irish Norwegian mother, who made sure that we knew, one, both sides of our ethnicity, embraced it, celebrated it, and explained it all to us when we were old enough to understand.
And about how old were you?
Pretty young. My mom started on stuff like that pretty young. I'm guessing maybe 5, 6. Okay. School age, starting school. Yeah, really we talked about it. Before that, I think I always identified more as Japanese. Okay. Because she really wanted that to be part of our home culture. I mean, it already was with my dad. My dad did most of the cooking. My dad was very Japanese. But as far as like a broader sense of what that means, interestingly enough, came at my early years from my mother, from my white mother.
Okay. So you go through school and you ended up at Seattleite. Right. So you said there was a story there.
Well, my mom went to Seattleite, as I mentioned earlier. And this was after I had done the music scene and decided I needed a break.
So this was after, so you went to college after music?
Yeah, I left home when I was 14. Okay. And I started playing in the clubs when I was 17. All right. And did that for a stretch. Did it for a living. Then moved to New York just to spread my wings and get out of here. Then moved to LA to check that out too and realized neither of those places are where I wanted to be, and I came back here. And decided that I always wanted to go to college. Okay. It just, either the opportunity wasn't there when I was, in the 70s, when I was I was a kid on my own and they didn't have the support system that they do now to kind of help push kids towards what they really want. So I went to Seattleite because of my major and because it was my mom's alma mater and because my mom was not a practicing Catholic. And no offense to anybody who is, whatever floats your boat. So on my mom's side, there were Catholic and Lutherans. On my dad's side, there were Catholics and Buddhists. And I was actually kind of attracted to Seattleite because it was a smaller university, and Jesuits are kind of kick-ass rebels. So, and because my major was philosophy, I was, trying to decide between the UW and Seattleite, and I chose Seattleite.
Okay. And when did you go to Seattleite?
I started in 88 and I graduated in 92.
Okay. So we're going to put a pin in this, but I want to come back to the music thing.
Sure.
So, okay. We're kind of working off of an informal list today, folks. Normally there's not a list, but we're going to add that to the informal list. Okay.
I know. I overthink things, as you said.
Yes. So
we're friends.
We're friends.
I could throw that back in your face.
She overthought things before. If she'd listened to the show, she would know. It's like, it's just going to be a conversation. All right. Your mom really tried to help you and your brother understand both sides of the coin.
Right.
Okay, great. But you've also mentioned your family is very...
My extended family
was very quiet about things.
Yes.
And you've done a fair amount of research on all of this stuff. And you did talk to some of your extended family members eventually and got to kind of confirm whispers in the wind type of things.
Correct.
All right. For the audience that's not aware of these questions, and I don't know you're going to know the answer to these questions. This is just questions that come to my brain.
Okay.
So you said there was about 3,000 people at Camp Harmony.
Uh-huh.
Approximately how many Japanese in the United States were interned? Do you know?
I want to say... Oh, you know what?
To the nearest dozen. No, I'm kidding.
Over 100,000.
Right, so it was a substantial number.
Yeah.
But the majority of them were on the coasts, though, the east and the west
Correct.
coast. Yeah, okay.
Mostly West Coast because of the Pacific Rim.
Right.
So really not the East Coast. In fact, when they got work released, they would send them to the East Coast. Like my great aunt was sent to Pennsylvania to work at a switchboard in a hospital.
Okay, all right. So as you've done research, how has that helped you? You did not. Okay, this at the risk of I'm not trying to offend.
Oh no,
but
no,
you didn't
just ask me anything.
You didn't go through this personally,
right?
So, but there's trauma.
Yeah, there's
So how has the research helped you work through the emotional feelings of this?
I think when I was younger, when I was in my 30s and 40s, the research, because that's my background, that's what I went into after college was research. I think I was a little bit detached from it in a way. It seemed more like, it's like, and I think that was because I really needed to detach myself from it in order to research it and just kind of understand the facts and get a feel for locations. And I wanted to know what they went through, but I don't think I was as emotionally attached to it as I became later on in life when my parents, particularly my dad, got sick and I cared for him. And after he died, reflecting back and looking at the person that he was and the difficulties that he had in his life, it became more personal to me. And it became more a part of my narrative in a way that it hadn't before.
Okay.
Because I guess I could see it. First of all, my dad and I had kind of a rocky relationship at points in our lives. And that was because he had a very difficult time as a child. And their lives were so incredibly uprooted. And there was so much anger and sadness and shame within my family. I can't speak for anyone else's.
Right.
When I was in college, my dad and I were hanging out and I looked at him and I just out of the blue, I said, "Dad, do you feel like a Japanese?" And just immediately he said, "Well, if I ever forget, some asshole reminds me." And that was my dad. So then I started, this is kind of an interesting tie-in to what you just asked me. I volunteered for densho.org, which is an organization that started in Seattle to document the historical aspects, all aspects of the camps. oral narratives, newspapers, things like that. And so I volunteered with them indexing newspapers, cross-checking and making sure that all the names from all these newspapers from different camps were documented so people could go in and search and try and find their family members or whatever. And that actually took a real emotional toll on me. I did it for months. I would read these newspapers, and I got to see this, like, particularly I asked for Tule Lake because my family was there. And I could see this evolution of this community of people who were trying to rebuild some semblance of a life behind these barbed wires, and what they were allowed and what they weren't allowed to do, what the rules were, how sometimes food was kind of sparse, and a community from the ground up of people who had varying degrees of resentment of even being there in the first place. I think a lot of them were in shock and were just kind of going through the motions of living. I think there were movers and shakers that ended up going out from the camps, different camps that I'm not familiar with too much, that went on to do big things about this and get reparation. So, yeah. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, you did. I mean, yes and no, but that's okay. That's the type of answers we actually like here, because you mentioned Densho. Elaborate on that a little bit more, and because that's something you sent me a link to look at, and I perused it. I can't tell you that I in depth went through things, okay. but I perused it, and it appears that there's a wealth of information there.
Densho's a great resource if you're interested in learning about Japanese American and internment. And people, like I said, some of the most moving things for me are the oral narratives, the historical oral narratives of people who were actually in the camp that were older than my dad. Mm-hmm. But they also give great historical information for teachers. They give lesson plans. It's a pretty extensive organization and resource.
Okay. I'm reading her notes.
Sorry.
No. Pork-filled productions. I was like,
how
what?
can you not like?
What's Pork-filled Productions?
Okay, Pork-filled Productions is an Asian American theater group, and they do Sarah Porkalob. Hence the name, is a playwright, an actor, just an amazing person. She's been taking her Dragon series all over the country. She is a mover and a shaker in the theater, in the Asian American theater arena, not just here, but she's becoming national. And so they do a lot of great work as far as Asian American theater. And my daughter's an actor, so she's tight with Sarah, and they're just, I just think they're amazing. Something that's really growing in the city, actually, is Asian American theater.
You also have a thing here for Japanese Culture and Community Center of Washington, which is that the jccw.org?
Yeah, okay. And that is also a really good resource for not just, I mean, it's more of a resource for things to do around Seattle.
Are there are tours still of, you said
Japantown?
Japantown.
Well, it was really interesting. Seattle Public Library did a program, I think it was this summer, and they promoted the walking tour at the downtown library with an exhibit, and then, gave people maps. Wing Luke does that as well, but the program at the library was great because it kind of brought a broader, maybe, group of people that might not seek out, like, going to Wing Luke in the ICD. So, yes, there's vestiges of Japantown left in what we used to call Chinatown International District.
Right.
And you can do this walking tour, and it's really, really interesting.
Yep.
It's seasonal, kind of. I mean,
if I remember correctly, there's also a walking tour over on Bainbridge Island.
Right. And I'm not as familiar with that. I know that there were so many Japanese farmers on Bainbridge Island.
Right.
And a story pops into my head. I remember somebody in my family telling me, or maybe I read it, that they were treated really pretty roughly because there were rumors that they were planting strawberries with arrows that pointed to the naval bases. I mean, all kinds of bullshit propaganda.
Right.
You know, to other them. But I mean, come on, give me a break.
No, I just know that I interviewed Bainbridge Distilling, and he mentioned that there was this large population of Japanese, and there was something special, and I can't remember. I should have researched again before I talked to you, but one of the things that this Bainbridge Distilling does that I thought was interesting is kind of a homage to, not acknowledgement here. They age one of their whiskeys in barrels made from Japanese wood.
Oh, my God.
And he actually goes to Japan and buys the wood in bulk and has it shipped back because you can't get it here. But the stuff's like $500 a bottle.
Okay, well, I was going to say nod to him because Japanese whiskey is really good.
Right, but it's like $500 a bottle.
It's expensive. The good stuff is expensive.
So anyway, but it was just, but it's kind of a nod to Bainbridge Island's Japanese population that was and how prevalent they were and important they.
Absolutely.
Okay. So for people to find out more, I do feel like our area has resources. What other resources have you found that are valuable and important?
Resources for history or resources for things to do, or both?
Yes, for both. Let's go with history.
Densho is, I think, the place to go.
Okay.
They really have a huge collection, a database of so many different aspects of the Japanese American internment, and it continues to grow. You know, and it's a handful of people working really hard to make this resource not just local but national. Okay. So that would, historically, I would say that. For things to do, Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington website, excellent resource.
Which one?
Which is that's the JCCW.
I'll put a link in the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
I figured you would.
You've got Edmonds High School here. Is that? And we also have Greenhouse. So I'm wondering, in Flower Shop, is that referencing back to your?
Yeah. I was just kind of off the cuff making some.
We have a book.
Right. No, boy. So right now, the Seattle Public Library is celebrating the 100-year of John Okada, who wrote a novel called No Boy, which was really controversial at the time because there were loyalty questions that they would ask you when you were in the camps. And the loyalty he wrote, it's a fictional, it's a fiction, but it's based on quite a few young men who felt that the questions were worded questionably, unfairly, I guess is a kind way to put it. Do you swear your allegiance? These are paraphrasing because I don't have them memorized. Do you swear your allegiance to the United States only? And do you swear that you will protect the United States from any foreign threats? Yada, yada, yada. Well, these young Japanese American men, mostly, that were asked this, felt that they should not have to say yes because they're American citizens. Like, they're already American citizens. Why are you asking me this?
Right.
So out of protest, they would say no. And those two questions, they would say no, and then they would say no. And that's what the book is based on.
Okay.
Seattle Public Library is doing a 3-part series celebrating that book. And there's one more coming up in November. I can't remember the exact date. I'm planning on going, but there's one more evening of lectures to talk about the book and the person.
You also mentioned Wing Luke walking tour and a bonsai museum. What's going on there?
So Wing Luke has been there for a very long time. They moved locations, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And they are a great resource for just immigration of Asians into the Pacific Northwest area. So they have exhibits about Filipino immigrants, Japanese, Chinese, every little bit in between, Taiwanese. And I wanted to mention them because they were recently, the Wing Luke was attacked. It was race related. Very clearly, the person who was arrested made it very clear that that's what it was about. Mm-hmm. There were people inside who were having a meeting, and I think it was a sledgehammer or maybe a crowbar. I don't know, but he came and busted the windows and was very, violent and clear that he wanted to do some harm. Luckily, he didn't do any more harm than property. Mm-hmm. But the Wing Luke has been there for so long, and they provide, I think, a really important service for Chinatown International District. So, and they need help right now.
Okay.
They are a nonprofit. They've served this community for decades and decades and decades. And to be, targeted like that as a museum.
Right.
I just feel really strongly that I needed to give them a shout out.
All right. The bonsai?
So the Pacific Bonsai Museum is, my understanding, one of only 2 bonsai museums in the United States. And bonsai, it is in Federal Way. They have bonsai that are over 100 years old. They teach classes. They have bonsai that came actually from the camps that are still being tended and survived. And they rotate the exhibits, and depending on what time of year it is, but you can go there, you can look at all the bonsai, you can see how old they are, you can look at who originally cultivated them. Like I said, take classes. A lot of people don't know about it. My daughter and I did 2 of their galas. We performed there as musical guests. We did it last year and we did it again this year.
Okay.
And so I'm just surprised that people, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, don't know more about this. It's like people know about the Japanese tea garden in the Arboretum, kind of, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know about that, right?
Yep.
But there's this other amazing place to go for a half a day or whatever. It's a little bit of a drive, but it, culturally, it's really cool. Bonsai was not just Japanese. It was from different Asian cultures. So I wanted to mention that as well. Okay. It's a cool place.
All right. Well, you and your daughter perform musically, so that's going to be the shifting of the gears here.
Okay.
To go back to when you were... Segue. Grinding the clutch. You mentioned earlier you left home as a teenager, and you started made your living as a musician.
Right.
So when I saw you perform with the dinette set, you were probably underage.
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Everyone looked older to me than they... I always have this thing that musicians were always older.
Yeah.
Even if it was like a 5-year-old on the stage, somehow they were older than me.
Well, and there's something about when you walk into a club and you're one of the performers, and it's like, okay, like people kind of...
Right.
But I did get busted at the Rainbow. The Rainbow found out how old I was and made me stay in the back room unless I was actually literally on stage.
I was going to go there and to see how your performance was.
I got busted.
We're gonna shift gears to that period of Seattle history now, okay? And how it interacts with interfaces with you. Mm. What was the first band you were a part of?
The first band I was part of was more of like a band. It never really was a band, but it was called Black Lace.
Okay.
And I played guitar.
Okay.
And it was all, I want to say women, but really we were girls.
Okay.
I mean, we were teenagers.
Okay.
And we would rehearse, but it was very garagey, and we never had a show.
Okay. Rephrasing my question: what was the first band that you had that you performed a show with?
It would have been the Dinette Set.
The Dinette Set. All right. How did the Dinette Set come about?
Well, it was talked about in the basement of Tower Records between Leslie Swanson and Bill Larson. Leslie and Bill were both really into girl group music and just 60s music and 50s and 60s music in general. And I think it was Leslie's dream to do kind of a girl group format. So it was just one of those symbiotic, organic things. So they talked about it. She said, I'd love to do this. I was hanging out with like the girls in the Cowboys scene. My boyfriend was in the girls, Brent Pennington.
Okay.
And so it was like, well, I know somebody who sings, and well, so-and-so's husband plays the bass, Scott McCoy, and his wife sings, and it just happened. And suddenly we have a 7-piece. Oh, and Dave Drury, I mean, he's playing drums for 50 bazillion bands, but let's ask him if he wants to do this, because he and Bill were really good friends and he loved the same kind of music.
I don't know where I heard, read, saw this story, but so I'm going to say this, and you're going to fact check me, okay?
All right.
But
okay.
you're involved in the story.
All right.
So
I better be.
Yeah. So you and the other singer went. Christy McWilson or Christy wasn't in the band.
Not right.
And
not
you
yet.
ended up going to her house.
Oh.
So far?
Well, I'm having a flashback. That's why I'm laughing.
Okay. And somehow what I remember. So I didn't know you, didn't know Christy then. This is 40 years ago.
Plus.
Yeah. I guess you went in to the house and Christy was auditioning by singing into a wine bottle Connie Francis songs.
Right. I think she did It's My Party.
That's hysterical to me.
Well, and it's funny too, because she says she walked, we were waiting for her. We were sitting on her porch. It was a nice sunny day. And Leslie and I were eating a packet of Starburst.
Okay.
And Christy said later on, upon reflection, she said she walked up and she just thought, oh my God. She thought we were chewing bubblegum, first of all, which is neither here nor there, but, she thought we were chewing bubblegum. And she goes, here are these two, chicks like sitting on my porch chewing bubblegum. What is this? And then she goes inside and sings into a wine bottle. So
this story is true.
It's true.
I don't know where I read it, saw it, or, and my visual of Christy McWilson singing into a wine bottle of Connie Francis song seems both highly believable and highly surreal simultaneously to me.
Well, that's Christy. That's
okay. So the band gets together.
Yeah.
And for a while, the band was performing. I mean, you were working.
We were working our asses off.
You were working 6 nights a week, if sometimes 7.
Oh, and booked constantly.
Right, and you were booked a lot of times. Back then the Seattle scene, be more than one band. The Heat.
Sure, and clubs used to do runs more back then.
Right.
You'd have long runs.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily be a house band, but you'd be booked for like 4 or 5 nights in a row, and then you'd have a different gig on a Sunday, or you'd have a festival to do or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you were one of those bands in the circuit that were working.
Right. Constantly, all the time.
Right. So it had its run, you know. How long?
Oh gosh, if memory serves, close to 3 years.
Wow, okay.
And we went out. We went out when we were still really pulling in crowds.
Right. So I ask all musical guests the same question. I'm probably going to ask you this question more than once here today. So I'm phrasing this. You have to answer the question, or I want you to answer the question. She's giving me a dirty look when I said I have to.
I raised my eyebrows. You have not seen my dirty look.
I want you to answer the question in reference to the time that you were with the Dinette Set.
All right.
Where was, as a performer, your favorite place to play when you were with the Dinette Set? What venue was like the venue you really liked? For whatever reason.
The one that busted me, the Rainbow.
You like the Rainbow?
I like the Rainbow because I liked the atmosphere. I liked the looseness of the crowd. I liked the feel of the place. Okay. You know, go ahead.
I'm going to flip the question.
Sure.
As an underage bar crasher.
Right.
During the Dinette Set era.
Yeah.
Where did you like to see music being performed at?
Oh, I preferred going to like larger venues, like the Moore or the Paramount, you know, before it got gentrified. And I mean, when I went to shows, I usually wanted to, I grew up in the era where you could, this was kind of a thing of the past. Well, it was when I was gigging, but the Catch a Rising Star concert series.
Went to a lot of those.
Oh man, a buck.
Mm-hmm.
God.
So who'd you see?
Oh my gosh, the Ramones. I think Blondie.
Yep.
God, there's so many. I can't even. It's like I can't even remember. There's just
so the two that I went to that really stick in my mind that were both very, very cool shows for a buck. I saw the Boomtown Rats.
Okay.
And that was a really entertaining because they didn't have a lot of music at that time. And I just remember they kind of had which was probably fluorescent tubes with cellophane over them to change the colors, kind of like a tic-tac-toe board behind them. And and they were the Paramount was probably too big of a venue for them at that moment.
I remember some shows like that that were a little under.
Yeah, well, they were a buck
populated.
But then, well, no, the audience was big.
Oh,
they just weren't. That stage was too big for the band.
I get what you're saying. Okay, they weren't ready for that size venue.
That was just. They should have maybe played the more than Neptune.
Sure.
Then the other one that was left just this imprint was. We went and saw Angel City.
Oh, wow.
And, Australian band.
Yeah.
One album, literally. The two things I remember was that the lead singer climbed way up on the stack, which now seems commonplace, right? But this was weird. But the guitar player came out, walked out on the stage, stood, finished the show, left. He never moved. I mean, the guy never moved. He planted his feet shoulder width apart, never moved. He was like a robot.
Right.
There was no movement. And those two shows, and I know I saw Blondie. I didn't see the Ramones. I think I saw Elvis Costello there.
Yes.
And I've seen Elvis Costello so many times that I can't remember.
I forgot about that. But because I have too. But Elvis Costello for sure. Did Patti Smith do one of those?
Might have. I did not see that one. But like you said, before the Paramount, that was kind of a dumpy place.
It was.
It was
a dump.
Yeah, it was kind of.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
But you liked. Okay, so in that era, in the Dinette Set era, you liked to see. You were more of a performance hall, more art Paramount. Okay, so after the Dinette Set,
because I spent so much time in the clubs.
Right.
I was like, I don't want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what did you do musically after the Dinette Set?
Well, I went to New York, thought a little bit about doing music there, but I had to get a job to support myself, and I had no time to do music. I was exhausted. I was working at the Grand Hyatt New York on 42nd and Park, 13-hour shifts, non-union job, hobbling home at night because I had to wear heels. I mean, I could jump around in heels on stage, but, standing at a front desk at a giant hotel in New York City kicked my ass. So I went to LA, thought the same thing. I went and stayed with the Moberlys, and great guys. And I just didn't feel it. I didn't feel LA either.
Okay.
So I came back, and that's when I went back to school. So I had a really long dry spell. What I did to keep my toe in the pool was I did demo work. So if people were trying to sell their songs, I had a friend who was a engineer, and he would hire me to sing vocals for these demos. I did a few stints as a wedding singer, which were, I mean, I look back kind of at it sort of fondly, but at the time I was just like, oh my God, wind beneath my wings again. So, and then, the kindness of friends. I've always had friends that kept doing it, like Christy, for example. We're sisters. And so I was able to work with her sometimes. And just, like I said, just keep either, just keep my little, sometimes it was just like the fingernail or the toenail of my little toe in the scene. But I always had to, just because it was such a part of my life.
Okay.
And yeah.
So going back to the Dinette Set era, great bands. Seattle had an underrated music scene in the late 70s, early 80s. Underrated.
No rose-colored glasses here. That was an amazing, vibrant music scene.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Okay.
A lot. You knew the bands. You might not have been friendly with everybody, but you knew the members and all this stuff. Out of all the bands, who should have made it? Like,
oh gosh,
who? Because
that's a loaded question.
I have opinions, and I've made my opinions known through the years. But I'm curious, who do you think should have made? Because there's no right or wrong answer here.
No, I know. I'm really thinking about it. I mean, nobody's ever really quite asked me it in that way.
Well, the next question is gonna be, which is your favorite child? So just get ready for that one.
Well, I have one favorite oldest child, one favorite middle child, and one favorite youngest child.
Oh.
So anyway, who should have made it? If I purely go on who worked so hard, I would probably say the Moberlys. And that's based on effort and work and songwriting skill and trying to hit both coasts and just hustling to get, record execs to come to shows and I mean, really working their asses off, wanting it, hungry for it.
Okay.
I think there's varying levels of that hunger that was in the scene. And I mean, did they all want to make it in quotes? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
If they did.
Okay.
I mean, I think probably the Cowboys at some point thought that they would do that. The Heats thought that they would do that. I think they were more focused. And I'm not saying that hunger is a bad thing.
No, I'm not. No, there's no. I'm just. Your view of the scene is different than my view because you were on the stage during that era.
Right, and we played with these guys.
And I was in the audience.
Yeah.
Physically.
Yeah.
Mentally, not always there. But physically, I was there.
Well, a lot of us weren't there mentally.
Right. But, and so I look at it and I just think Seattle obviously was on the map during grunge. I mean, there was plenty of press and the world's attention, the spotlight turned to Seattle during that period of time. I also think, though, that the scene in Seattle a decade earlier, dare I say, might have even been better.
Yeah.
And that there were...
Well, and there were a lot of like glam and punk bands, too, that came before us, like in the 70s, like the late 70s. And, some other bands came out of that scene.
Sure.
And so these people who I was always kind of the baby.
Well, you were though.
I was literally.
You were literally younger than
I mean,
else.
most of these people were in their early to mid 20s, and so I was.
And you were late teens, if you will.
Yeah, 17 when I started in the clubs.
Yeah.
So, my perception of them was that everybody was just really working hard to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe, pay their rent and put out an album. And that hopefully the album being the biggest aspect of getting anybody to pay attention to you. All of us would kind of wait and kind of go, okay, are they going to hit? Are they going to hit? So it's kind of hard for me to pick one band because being so much an insider, not that, like you said, not that all of them were my best friends or anything. And we were a little bit of an aberration because we were one of the big draws along with all the other dude groups. And so even though everybody thought of us as a cover band, we actually did do some originals, wrote songs for the band, but we wrote them specifically for that format.
Right.
And, but we were, I wouldn't go so far as to say we were the black sheep, but it was still a dude's world. Right. Rock and roll was still...
Well,
it still is.
It still is, yeah.
It still is. And, it's changed a bit, but...
I mean, I remember, go back to when MTV popped, right?
Right.
And a band like the Go-Go's, the comment was, they can play guitars? I mean, it was like women were incapable of playing a musical instrument.
And exactly. I mean, Christy and I were, and so was Shelley. She was a great pianist. I mean, Christy and I were both musicians.
Right.
But that's not what we did in that band.
Right.
And so we were delegated to being chick singers. And that's kind of, we were good. In fact, I thought we were really good. And
you were.
But that was kind of the way we were seen. And we had 5 guys behind us who were amazing. And in fact, we did a video.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up.
And when we got the storyboard for the video for the guy who was producing us, and they put some money into this video, it was on the MTV basement tapes. And the MTV was, like you said, very new. And they wrote the guys out of the storyboard. And Christy and Shelley and I were like, what is this? And they said, well, we're going to go down to LA and we're going to record, and we were going to, film this video. And we've got all this great, surf footage from, what's that guy who did all the ski and surf? He's put out lots of movies.
Warren Miller?
Warren Miller.
Okay.
So his cinematographer was directing our video.
Oh, wow.
And he got background that Warren Miller didn't want, surf background. So if you watch that video, the B-roll surf background or like the green screen background is Warren Miller footage.
Oh, wow.
And they had written the guys out. And we said, no, we're not doing it. So they had to scrap, well, they didn't scrap at all, but they had to write new parts in for the guys because we're just like, absolutely not.
Yeah,
because they wanted to make us into something.
Right.
They wanted to commercialize us and package us. And, for good or for bad, we weren't down for it.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah. I don't regret that decision at all.
So our conversation's taken we've taken 2 very diverse, but both of these paths are your paths.
Right.
So we're going to wrap this up. I've got some stock questions I ask my guests.
Sure.
Okay. But first stock question I'm going to ask you today is, what didn't I ask you that I should have? What didn't I cover that you would have hoped that we would have touched on?
I don't know if I'd say I hoped we would have touched on it, but there were the Seattle scene was extremely white back then. And there weren't many singers in that actually very extraordinary scene, or musicians in general, just a very small handful of POC. And I guess I just wanted to point that out, that, for me personally, I thought it was an interesting experience because I remember standing on stage and I heard these servers talking about me and saying, is she even really Asian or does she just do her makeup that way? And
that's awful, but it's kind of.
I know.
It's
I mean, I'm like on stage and they're next to the bar, and I'm kind of looking at them like, I can hear you.
Oh my gosh.
It's really weird.
Oh my gosh. Oh. Okay.
So it's not that I wish that you had brought that up, but that came to mind when you said that.
The only band that I can think of in my limited, and it was a Tacoma band, was Stripes.
Right. Well, Glenn Oyabi in one iteration of the Moberlys, Lulu in Fastbacks is half Japanese like me.
Okay.
I'm not saying that there weren't any, but
it
there was so few.
It was
literally one hand.
Right.
Okay. You know.
All right. So as we're recording this now, we're in Seattle, the umbrella that is Seattle.
Right.
Okay. I don't know. Are we in the city limits?
Yes, we are. Okay, well, if in this day and age, yes, we are.
Okay. So here's the question.
Yeah.
Where's a great place for me to go get a cup of coffee?
Here?
In the Seattle area. What coffee shop can you recommend to me in Seattle?
Oh, goodness.
The look on her face is meaning that she's processing too many choices, folks.
I am. Oh gosh, my favorite place is still, and oh my gosh, the name is leaving me now. It's in the alley behind the old U bookstore.
Monorail?
No. Gosh, maybe it's not there anymore.
Yeah, I've been there in years, so.
Okay. Well, now if I was going to go get a cup of coffee, I'd probably just make it at home because it's too expensive.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So coffee at home, I feel like we're playing, what's that show where there's like you name and there's 10 things and, Family Feud or whatever it is, it's like coffee at home, ding, ding, ding.
Right.
Okay. So next question is, and as I look at my watch, it's about lunchtime.
Okay.
So where's a great place for me to grab lunch in Seattle?
Oh gosh. Well, if you want Asian food this side of International District, Chinatown, I'd go to Chang's Gourmet right there where the freeway and on-off ramp is to the express lanes.
Okay.
Oh gosh, what are my faves? There's a great Thai place right up the street.
Okay. So, all right. There's no wrong answers. I ask these questions of everybody because it's a way of getting a little local flavor.
Right.
And I joke, please don't say Starbucks. I just.
Oh God, no. I mean, there's always Dick's.
The best hamburgers in the world. I mean, they're terrible, but they're awesome.
They are. They're not great hamburgers. No, they're all dried out, but it's Dick's. Nothing tastes like Dick's.
No, and they're awesome. Okay.
Spuds.
Yeah.
You can tell me. I'm if I'm a low maintenance kind of gal.
They're good solid choices. Good solid choices. Okay. Last question. You have to answer this question completely.
Okay. Oh God, the look in your eye. It's just you're okay. My soul.
I know.
I feel it.
Well, we've already answered that you have your favorite oldest, your favorite middle, and your favorite youngest child. So this is that type of question.
Okay.
Cake or pie, and why?
This has changed for me.
Okay.
All right. It used to be cake, but I didn't like the frosting. So I would eat the cake, and people would come up to me and go, "You're not going to eat your frosting?" And I'm like, "Here, have it."
Okay.
Now it's pie because I love fruit.
Okay.
So I like fruit pies.
What's your favorite fruit pie?
Cherry.
Oh, okay.
But real cherry, not those funky ass ones that come in a can that are all jellied.
Right.
And I love pie crust. I love pie crust. I love a flaky carb.
A flaky carb. There you go. That question, the answers that I get are just, it's so much fun for me to ask that question of people. And some people have it like instantly, and you will not be able to argue with them their answer. Like X. Can't tell me the Y is good. And other people look at me like, what hand do I have to cut off?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what? I can't answer that question.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I won't refuse a piece of cake.
Right,
but
you know,
if they're sitting there and
right, you can only have one.
Right.
Push comes to shove. Which one do you take?
And also, I think it's because I'm a decent cook and I'm a decent baker, but I make really shitty pies. Okay. So I appreciate a good pie.
Okay.
I can make a decent cake. I don't know why, but my pies suck.
Okay.
So
pie game's not strong.
Yeah, my pie game is on. I got a pie hole and I'm going to fill it.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.